Hey everyone, Ed here with Ultra Team Development, and welcome to the Season 1, Episode 1. We've got Brodie Whitney, who's on the show as our inaugural guest. Welcome, Brodie.
Thank
Um,
you.
and I'll give you a quick little background, but I'll let Brodie kind of speak about most of what's going on. And Brodie is a professional coach. He works with men primarily in entrepreneurial space and relationship space. And him and his wife Christina have the Relationship Quest, which is an amazing new program that he's got launching as well. But Brodie, I'll let you kind of roll into who you are and what's going on, and so go ahead, dive right in. Let's get after it.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So, what's important to me when we're here talking about leadership is mission. So, what's the work that I'm here to be doing? What's my purpose? And I've put a lot of attention towards that in my life, and feel like I have both feet on my path of purpose. And this work that we're doing with relationship is a huge part of my mission. Just to give a bit of background on it, it started by when you find your soulmate, you want to do everything that you can to create lasting love, right? and
Hopefully, yeah, for
relationship is
sure.
hard. And so when Christina and I met, we decided that, well, there's something really special here. We need to find out how to make this work. We had both come from a divorce, and so there was a lot we had learned, and we just found each other and wanted to figure out what it would take to make it work. And so we started exploring how to build a lasting and fulfilling relationship for ourselves first. And we found stuff that we knew other people needed. And I was already in the coaching space. So I've been a high performance coach for coming up to 15 years, and more of like an entrepreneur, business coach, health, leadership. And it's really just been in this last year where relationships have become a big focus of mine. And so, yeah, we're supporting couples who are struggling and want to start connecting, and helping people build rock solid trust, amazing communication, and satisfying intimacy. And we're helping people who are in a committed relationship and seeing people turn things around and get in alignment really quickly with these coaching sessions.
Well, I remember when we first met, and you were saying you're talking about Christina, and it was like your eyes
Yeah.
totally like lit up, and
Oh
you're
my
like,
gosh.
oh my
Yeah.
goodness, like I can't believe this has happened, and all this other sort of stuff, and that was really cool to see. And so when you guys were kind of leaning into this and being like, hey, we have something here, and we can sort of help other couples on what's going on. What was kind of the focus? Were you thinking more along the lines of people who are in a similar position as you, where this was kind of your newfound and new relationship after something that had kind of come apart? Or were you looking at maybe couples who are in the beginning parts of the relationship, or couples who, like myself and my wife, who have been together for 30 years, and like that's it, right? so so
Yeah.
so what was kind of the focus? Like who were you thinking about speaking with?
We're, the whole time it's been about people who are in a committed relationship, whether that's marriage or just like, okay, I want to be with this person for the rest of my life. Um, and it's worked out to be predominantly people who have been married for 7 years plus is sort of what I'm seeing. There's a number of people I've been working with who are in 20-year plus marriages, and so they're in patterns that are deeply ingrained, right, and struggling to figure out how to shift them, like negative patterns.
Hmm.
And I'm seeing people shift these patterns very quickly and get in alignment, and it's starting to become common. People say, I never thought we could get to this level. Like
Hmm.
like it never was even this
Like the
good before.
possibility of it being a thing was like
Yeah,
out of not even on the horizon line.
yeah.
And what is one
And
of, like when you mention a pattern, like what do you mean by that? Like what's a pattern that kind of sticks out as being sort of a common thing that comes forth?
I think trust is kind of the foundational pattern. And when people think about trust or betrayal, they're often thinking about infidelity or cheating.
Hmm.
But betrayal happens a lot and people don't even realize it, just in day-to-day conversations. where, you know, someone's like in a intimate relationship, you rely on that other person, right, in different capacities. And something as simple as, you know, I didn't get, you know, didn't get the laundry folded, or I didn't get the groceries on the way home, or hey, I have something to do, we have this plan but I have something else to do. Even those little things can add up and break trust. So that's one of the patterns, how to build trust and what breaks trust.
So I mean, it sounds like that's pretty heavily tied together between, like, say, integrity, where you, like, you say, like, what you say and what you do are in congruence, and when there's that moment of, like, where what you say and what you actually do are not on the same plane,
Yeah,
and the more that that happens, is that kind of what you're highlighting?
that's one example for sure. I think at the core of those kinds of experiences or interactions, you know, people could be thinking, are they going to leave me?
Mm.
You know, if
Like
they didn't
like almost
follow
like a
something.
now, is that seated in something, or is that just sort of this wild fear? Like, is it kind of like, perhaps there's something there where there's a past pattern, and there's this sense of like, oh, I have to hold on to this so tightly, and yet, like, is that because there's already patterns of not trust happening, and so then the fear of the person leaving is there, or is the fear of the person leaving there first, and then the pattern starts to evolve because of that almost self-fulfilling prophecy type of
Yeah, you're asking great questions.
thing?
It has a few different ways of manifesting itself. It depends a lot on our upbringing, what we experienced, and whether, you know, we have abandonment issues from losing a parent or someone leaving us in the past, or just feeling abandoned. It's amazing where the mind can go and create those abandonment scenarios. Um, but if you think about it, it's kind of natural because, you know, think about for yourself. Let's say a fitness goal. You want to get in great shape. You want to start working out. How often does it happen that the person who says that doesn't follow through? Right. So we have to build trust within ourselves first, but then you're handing that trust over to another person. You're relying on not just yourself now, but a whole other person. And
Like your
so it's
trainer or whatever happens
natural.
to be, and so so your spouse or your partner in this scenario, I guess we'll just use partner as a generic term.
Yeah.
So your partner
Yeah.
in the scenario becomes that other person who's helping you achieve that goal type of thing.
Yeah. And to create that safety and trust between two people, it's a sacred thing, and I believe lasting love depends on it. But it's not easy to create. First of all, again, hard to create within ourselves alone, and then you bring in another person, it becomes even harder. But there's patterns that, like, there's simple things you can do when you understand them to start to build and strengthen that trust, versus continually you know, creating betrayal and breaking trust without
Mm.
even realizing it.
Okay, so let's come back to this in a little bit, because I think you kind of like hit like a golden nugget, and so, but I want to
Yeah,
create a bit of reference, especially around the work that you did before, where you're working primarily with men and men as entrepreneurs and in relationships.
yeah.
And so, were there similarities in what you were experiencing there that have kind of become really relevant to what's happening now as you're working primarily with couple partnerships?
Yeah. I mean, I would say I'm still primarily working with men.
Okay.
So one of the things I discovered in this process of, you know, starting to support people and coach in their relationship is, um, if I can just talk to the man, we can usually make the shift like that.
Okay,
And
so then that means that they're a huge part of this,
a
of of,
huge
of, of,
part.
of what's going on there. All right, so
Yeah.
let's
So I
let's
had a
dig into that a
coach.
little bit.
Yeah, I had a coach I hired probably 10 years ago to help me develop presence, to become more present and grounded in my life. And one of the first things he said to me, which really struck a chord for me, was, when the men get their shit together, the women are ready.
Mm,
And I was
wow.
like,
Hang on,
light
just
bulb
repeat that.
moment.
Hang on, just say that again. Just say that again. This is awesome.
When the men get their shit together, the women are ready.
Oh man, that's awesome. That's so like that should be like tattooed
Yeah,
somewhere. That's awesome.
yeah, absolutely. Huge light bulb moment. I see it happen for people when I share it. Everyone gets it. Basically, for the most part, relationships are struggling because there isn't safety,
Mm.
there isn't trust. um, Most women, more than anything else, want in a relationship safety and security. Men want freedom, and
They
so
almost seem like values that are almost pulling against each other.
they do, when our cultural narrative is that commitment is the opposite of freedom. But
Mm.
the truth is, what I found for myself and what set me free is that commitment is actually freedom. When I fully commit to something, I'm free. If I'm only half in or half out, or if I'm in something I don't want to be in, that's the opposite of freedom, right? So, um, back to this pattern of, you know, the other set of patterns is around masculine feminine dynamics and polarity. So if the man, like we, men and women have masculine and feminine, we all have both.
Mm. Yeah, we're integrated in both ways, 100%.
Yeah. And but in a relationship, the man is responsible for the masculine, and oftentimes the men aren't taking responsibility or an ownership of that role, and they're not making decisions, they're not making plans, they're waiting for their partner, to take initiative. And so
Like
the
almost
the
so for example, like a little thing would be like, oh hey, like what's going on for the weekend, and they haven't like said, hey, we're gonna go on a hike or we're gonna go on a country drive and then hang out at this farmer's market or something like that. Like
exactly,
it
the
becomes
man
super
will say,
passive, and it's like, okay, what are we doing, and what's on the calendar, and sure, just tell me when to show up is something that you hear, right? Like
yeah,
I've heard guys say that where they're like, okay, sure, let me just ask the wife when my wife is totally against.
exactly,
My wife is very opposed to the wife as the term, so we never use it. But every time she hears someone say it, she's like, oh, they use the wife term, and there's that thing of like, okay, well, let's ask the wife and I'll show up type of thing. It's very passive. There's no action, there's no agency behind what's going on there. So is that where you're
sure.
leaning towards?
Yeah, when we're talking
Yeah.
about masculine and feminine, I mean, the masculine is direction, decision. And so if if your wife says, hey, what do you want to do this weekend, and you say, I don't know, what do you want to do, that's that can be a much bigger betrayal than it might seem on the surface.
Mm.
Versus if you, like you said, hey, well, she asks you, what do you want to do this weekend? And you say, well, hey, I was thinking about a hike or going to this place. Maybe you come up with some options, and then you might even ask, like, which of those would you like to do? Versus just saying, I don't know, what do you want to do?
Hmm.
It isn't that you have to make the decision and say, here's where we're going. That can be a bit much sometimes. It can be great, but a good balance is giving some thought to it, coming up with some options, and then making the decision together.
And it's so important to share that stuff too, because you're kind of revealing a part of yourself about what's important to you. And when you know what's
Mm.
important to the other person, then you feel understood and they feel understood. Like for example, if I'm like, hey, let's go for a hike, it means I'm kind of in that mindset of being like, I want a sense of adventure and I want to get out into nature and maybe decompress from technology. Like I'm sharing all of that with one line of like, hey, what do you think about going for a hike this weekend?
Yeah,
Like right away. And so if that person's listening, like if they're in a deeper state of listening, they're hearing that that is a priority, um, and 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 that's a really really important thing. Um, and
sure.
so I love the fact that you brought up this idea that it's such a simple, like it seems simple, but it can reveal a greater sense of betrayal to the relationship or to the commitment of the relationship from that perspective.
Definitely.
Yeah, so I mean, to segue into so just a bit of background. So Simone and I have been dating since 1991, so it was a long time ago, and we got married in '98. So it's been a number of years, and but we always had this thing where we treated each day as its own day, and each interaction is the relationship. That how we treat each other in this moment is the relationship, and so then that becomes the tapestry that gets woven, right? And so
Mm.
when people look and say, "Oh, you know what? It looks like you guys have a really like loving, fulfilling relationship," you know, we've had our personal struggles, but our relationship has always been pretty strong because we've been there to support each other. It's because we have that philosophy, but we agreed on it. Like, and I think this is
Yeah.
another thing, you know, maybe where what you and Christina are doing is, how do you agree upon the things on how you're going to make the decisions? So, like for example, how do you decide on how you're going to decide? Right?
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
that sort of like top level thing is very
Yeah.
important. And is that something that you guys talk about? You know,
Not
what are
really, but it's definitely something we could explore that'd be really powerful. Yeah.
yeah,
How do you
because
decide on how you're going to decide?
yeah, it's such an
Yeah.
important thing. Like, okay, well, what are the terms here? So, like, for example, if there's a conflict, you know, what are the terms? What language are we allowed, and what language are we not allowed to have in any conflict that's going to happen in the future? So
Hmm.
even though in the moment, right, you may get like hijacked by your fight response or your, you know, whatever happens to be going on, and you still have that thing where you're like, hang on, I have a contract here of what we agreed upon to be the level of the relationship about where we're allowed to tip the boat, right?
Hmm.
And those things are super important. From personal experience and from seeing the fulfillment on that side as well. Okay,
Yeah.
so tell me a bit more about the this whole idea of, you know, when the man decides that the women are ready. Um, how do you excavate that when you're coaching your clients, like how do you get to the point where that kind of thing can come to the fore? Because we can say stuff, you know, and you know, I experience this as well. We can say stuff, but it may not actually, person may not relate to it. They may not actually like let it kind of embody who they are and integrate it into what's going on.
Hmm.
So how do you excavate that? What are
Yeah.
some of the things and challenges and wins and stuff like that? Just talk a little bit about what happens when you're kind of trying to make these really powerful, poignant, um, um, you know, concepts come to the fore.
Okay. Yeah. So essentially, I mean, we all want to connect, right?
Mm-hmm.
We all want connection. And we're all putting our effort in it. If we're talking about in a relationship, we're putting our effort in to make things work. And if things aren't working, it's it's not like a a business deal didn't work out. This is your relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
You bought a home together, maybe you have a business together, maybe you have kids, you're living together, everything is intertwined, so there's a lot on the line.
There's deep roots. Yeah.
Deep roots, yeah. And it's your heart. And what's I'm a big fan of love. And um, when you find love, it's really special, so you want to make it work. So one of the approaches I'll take is just very simply looking at, is what you're doing working? Is it working?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not working, okay, well, let's find a different approach. I want to make things as simple as possible. I want to, like, basically what we're talking about here is giving men the steering wheel and gas pedal for their relationship, versus men being in a relationship throwing their hands up going, I don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing the best I can, but it's not working. What I find, when you can identify a pattern that they're doing over and over that isn't working, when you can point that out, people want to shift it. And if you have the alternative for them and a simple solution, and then they start using it and it works, people want to use it. So
Yeah.
for
So I know. So when people are coming to you and they're looking for that guidance, that coaching, and that insight,
yeah,
you know, there's already sort of like this little desire, this little flame that's kind of sparked to be like, okay, I think there needs to be something, right?
yeah.
And they may not know what that is, and you know, but you know, have you encountered that thing where someone is like, yeah, man, that's just how it is. Like there's almost like this apathy behind it, like this like, okay, well, this is the pattern, this is the road
Yeah,
that's been run. You know, it's like on highways where the trucks end up like creating this in the road because that's the pattern that's been going
yeah,
like so much that they're, you know, going outside of that is actually like not comfortable. And so how do you get that idea across that the initial stage here is going to be uncomfortable, and but long term, even midterm, like even in the short midterm, the change can happen pretty
Yeah.
rapidly. How do you get that peg moving? Um,
Yeah. First of all, I have to be living it. So I have to be able to show up in a conversation and be embodying what I'm teaching.
mm,
It doesn't need to mean I need to be perfect, but in regards to what you're talking about, I need a growth mindset.
yeah.
I need to be able to I need to be open to things changing versus just saying that things are the way they are.
Mhm.
When I encounter that with someone, and it is rare to get to that point, I can think of one guy I've been working with, and he's been back and forth. He gets stuck in these ruts, and he'll just say, if I tell myself that the universe is unfolding in my favor, I'm just deluding myself. If I tell myself it's working, it's not true. And he'll dig himself in a pit.
Mm,
I can't help him there.
yeah.
But basically, people are motivated by two things: pain and pleasure. So for him, once it gets too painful, for example, he came to me a couple of weeks ago and said, okay, my wife just brought me the divorce papers. What do I do? Now all of a sudden he's willing to do what he wasn't willing to do
Right.
before.
Yeah,
You know, but
yeah, your back's up against the wall here now, right? Like
yeah,
you're out of space. You
yeah, but most people I find it's not hard to tune it to get them to see that what they're doing isn't working, and then give them something that works. And for example, when your woman has a problem and she's overly emotional about it, a lot of men get lost in that. They don't know what to do.
mm,
They get triggered or they try to fix it.
yeah, the
And
trying to
neither
fix it
one of
thing is not. It's always the go-to.
yeah,
Not always, but in a lot of cases, it becomes the go-to where it's like, oh, problem, let me solve this, right? Like it's like put on the tool belt and figure it out. Use a cliche or a
totally.
stereotype, but that's effectively what's going on in the brain, right?
Yeah.
And it's not the thing. But you said something else wasn't the solution either. You were like,
Yeah. So getting triggered.
yeah,
So this is, I mean, this is, it's hard in those moments. If you don't know what to do, you're screwed. When you know what to do, it's still really hard.
mm,
So, for example, um, we're all emotional beings, men and women. And I think it's important to, again, reiterate the man is responsible for the masculine in the relationship. That doesn't mean 100% of the time.
hmm
Okay. We're still emotional beings. But if you want to be able to, if your wife or your partner, female partner, is emotional and she's sharing with you from that place, first of all,
Now, when you say emotional, are you talking about like emotional expression? Like there's
emotional
a
expression, like I
higher
have a
level
problem,
of
things aren't working, I don't know what to do,
yeah,
stress. Then if you get triggered, um, then it's not going to work.
hmm
Essentially, as a man, we need to be able to um, work with our emotions, is one way to say it.
yeah,
And we need to be able to train ourselves not to be triggered in those situations. That is incredibly hard when it's for example, a money stress financial situation and things aren't looking good and she's feeling insecure in the finances and relationship. Like that's a lot for a person to try to deal with it
hmm
without getting triggered. That's the discipline. So as men, we need places where, men's groups or
yeah.
sports or things that we do where we can be with our emotions, and it's okay to talk about them, and it's okay if we get triggered, and but in a situation like if you want to build safety and trust in a relationship, which again is usually the most important thing to the woman, then when she brings a problem or a challenge to the table and you get triggered, then she feels even more insecure and unsafe
Mm.
because all of a sudden that, like, the person she relies on to help her get through this, they lost it as well. They're off center, ungrounded.
Yeah, and so I mean, you're kind of referencing this idea of emotional intelligence, was a bit of a buzzword that's kind of floating out there in the world right
Yeah,
now, but effectively,
it is
like
fully.
connecting with the emotional state is really important. Like for example, there's someone who's sort of in my extended network, and when I was trying to sort of like connect with them emotionally, this is like another guy. Um, because they were going through some struggles and whatever else, they said, "Hey, man, like I really don't want to go into these deep dives because I'm just not built that way." And I was like, "Oh, like that's like really hard. Like that's a defense mechanism. Like I
Yeah.
recognize that that's a defense mechanism around some sort of discomfort with an emotional state,
Hmm.
and this is kind of the thing that I think you are really working well on. I know that this is a really important thing for me as well, where I'm trying to get this idea of within the bubbles that we have and the connections that we have and the network we've got and the who we can influence and sort of positively impact, where like yeah, as men we have the full spectrum of emotions. It's not about being built that way or not being built that way. Like that's a
Yeah.
conditioning. That's a social
Yeah.
conditioning. When you were born, you had the whole spectrum of emotions, and somewhere around age 2, 3, 4, things started to sort of get boxed in depending on your upbringing and where you grew up and all sorts of other factors going on. But we were full emotional spectrum, right? Every color of the rainbow
Yeah.
on that emotion wheel, right? And and that to come back to that, to reconnect with that is so important. From that perspective, like, and what you're talking about with getting triggered, for example, I worked through a bunch of trauma, a number of years ago, went through depression, and but one of the things that always sort of came up was, throughout the years, and my wife is very emotionally expressive, and she's very pure about that approach, still pretty well regulated, but not like she doesn't hide it. But when she would get sad, I was disconnected from sadness because sadness always meant something like a state of freeze for me, because like if I was sad, it meant something very hostile was going on. And so when she would get sad, I would get triggered and become angry. Like, what does that have to do with her being sad? Like I'm
Yeah.
not like suddenly I'm like, oh, and it turns into this thing where like, and now it's turned into this a different, totally different scenario, this different focus, this different lens of like her sadness. Okay, how do I connect with that? Because I have done the work to help connect with my sadness, therefore I have empathy.
Hmm.
And that's such a huge shift in that approach. But this closed off thing that happens with guys with conditioning about like, oh, I'm not built that way, or oh, that's not a guy thing, or whatever happens to me, boys don't cry growing up or whatever,
Yeah.
I mean, I was taught like, not a good role model at all, but I was taught with this idea that, well, if someone upsets you, like you hurt them, right? Like I don't use that as my prescription, but when you're a child and that's what's being taught to you, it's like, what does that do to you emotionally? It means that when you get hurt, you don't feel the sadness, you shift to anger. and
Hmm.
and so much of that happens with this whole idea of like how to be a guy type of thing. And
Hmm.
I think it's really cool that you're kind of like unpacking that and going, hang on a second, like don't get triggered, and then follow through without trying to solve the problem. So then what do you do? Well, like what is the solution? um, Not the solution. What's the next action that is sort of the thing that some
Well, I
people that
think
are
you can
watching
say
it
the
can take
solution,
away?
because I mean, ultimately, if you want to fix the problem, then you don't want to try to solve it, because that's not going to fix the problem.
Yeah.
Right? So
Right.
you can still have the same approach. You just want to do what works. And when guys try to fix the problem, and the woman gets even more upset, they get confused and they don't know what to do, because they said, well, you told me you had a problem, I'm trying to fix it, now you're getting even more upset. They don't understand that the woman just wants to express herself
Hmm.
and her emotions and what's happening for her, without the guy trying to fix it. That essentially there really is no problem. The guy made it into a problem. um,
It's
uh
almost like
she's
skipping rungs on a ladder. Like you can't get to the top of the ladder without going through the rungs, type of thing. And guys are
yeah,
like, oh no, like let's get to the roof. Let's get up to the next level. Like right now. It's
yeah,
like no, but you got to go through the process of the emotional rungs on the ladder so you can process it and figure it out and experience it and let it move. There was something you said that was really cool when you and Christina had joined in on an integration circle, and that was really cool where you were talking about this idea of like that for you emotions move very fluidly, like or I can't remember the term that you used exactly, but it really, I think it hit everyone that was there at
okay.
that event. Do you remember what that was, and are you cool with kind of like bringing that forth, because that really resonated with me, and I think it would be cool
Yeah,
to
so I
share it
have all
here.
these systems that seem to be working and they seem to work for the people that I share them with predictably and consistently. And the one you're talking about is, I think it was when I talked about we need to be able to, um, it isn't about not feeling your emotions, it isn't about changing them. It's about being able to be with your emotion, but not get sucked into it and stuck in it.
Mm.
So, for example, if I notice myself getting triggered, let's say, in a relation, in a conversation with my wife, and she starts talking about finances, and I start it's getting pulled into an inner dialogue, I start getting triggered, like, well, we're making all this money, why isn't it working? We should be better off. Ultimately, I want her to be happy. I end up feeling threatened because she's not happy. I'm not doing a good job. I'm not enough. Like, that's kind of the snowball
Yeah,
triggered.
yeah.
So if I can identify what I'm feeling, first of all, oh, and let's just say I'm feeling sad. And maybe I'm feeling sad and angry. If I can identify those, instead of saying I'm not supposed to feel emotion, I'm not supposed to get triggered, instead of that, I want to actually tune into what I'm feeling. I want to allow myself to feel it for a few moments. When you can name your emotion, it will start to integrate. When you're not resisting what you feel, then it can start to integrate. So there's two parts there. One, whatever you're feeling, let yourself feel it. Allow it totally
Mm.
without any resistance or trying wanting to change it.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. You're gonna feel it for a few moments. I think over time you'll get better and better at it. At the beginning, it might take a while, but I don't think it takes long to get to be able to feel it for a few moments and it starts to shift. If you can name it, that's even better. Because if I read you a list of 10 different emotions and the one you were feeling was on there, when I read it out, your body would relax.
Mm.
So being able to name the emotions is also very powerful, something that a lot of people aren't good at. We don't have a good emotional vocabulary. Now that you've done that, um, what I've found works to be able to, uh, instead of being at the mercy of your emotions, what you're feeling, for men, what I found works is to identify what do I stand for in my life.
Oh, okay. That's
Essentially, what
cool.
are my top values? What do I stand for as a man is a very powerful question that opens up the answer for me. And I may, in that kind of a situation, I may say, I stand for self-actualization. I stand for love. I stand for truth. And now, what have I done? Instead of getting triggered by the emotion and snowballing in that, I felt the emotion. I let myself feel it. Then I asked myself a powerful question: what do I stand for? And in that process, I actually take the emotion and sort of like, if it's on a screen, honestly, and I'll kind of move it to the side, and then I'll bring in front of me what I stand for, my value.
Almost like a slide reel type of thing. Like,
Yeah,
okay, great.
it's
So
like
this,
shifting screens.
cool, cool.
And now I'm present. I'm grounded. I'm present. I'm in integrity with my values to finish. And then that ties in to what we are talking about before with how do you do it, right? So now that I've got myself present and in alignment, then all I need to do is really to be present and listen. Um, what I don't need to do is remember everything that she's saying and feel like there's going to be a test at the end to see if I listened properly.
Right, you're not listening for like
No,
for this is not a trivia thing. This is not Jeopardy after,
no,
right?
no, not a test.
What is 3 minutes and 10 minutes into the last discussion? It's like, well, no,
Yeah,
right? It's
yeah.
yeah, it's the context of hearing the feelings. Is that something like
Like,
hearing the idea, the energy, and kind of so that they feel understood.
yeah. Some people call it feminine chaos or feminine expression, where when there's a lot coming and
Yeah.
it's all kind of coming at once, the last thing you want to be doing is feeling like it's a test and you have to remember all the words. That's going to put you in your head. You're not going to be present. All you need to do is be present with her. You don't even need to know, you don't need to remember the words. You don't even honestly have to pay attention to the words. All you have to do is be there with her. One way to do that is to start tuning into empathy, where you're actually moving into a place of opening up to feeling what she's feeling.
Mhm.
That's a really powerful way to connect. You're not going to be able to do that if you're trying to remember all her words again and trying to feel like there's going to be a test or you have to fix a problem. That's a simple way. Sometimes in the beginning, men will get even stuck on that. And so something that can help a guy break through to making a connection and getting past some of these hangups that we're talking about is actually kind of penetrating that woman with their eyes. You're being present and you're just like uh, just to be, it's a little, it might sound a little coarse, but it works, is basically seeing yourself like, I'm going to ravage you, I am with you 100%. And for men, sometimes focusing on sort of their sexual desire can help break through this stuckness that men get in of, I have to fix the problem, I don't know what she's saying, this is too much, I'm getting triggered. So that
So
can be
almost
a way
going
to
into
kind of
like a passion
break
state,
through.
like like this sort of like well, I have a deep passion for this other person,
Yeah,
and then I'm gonna listen from that platform.
yeah,
Is that yeah?
exactly.
That's powerful stuff
You're
though.
penetrating through the problem and you're saying like, I'm gonna take you, I'm gonna ravage you, and essentially you're um, using sex and passion and intimacy to penetrate through the problem, essentially to get yourself present.
Yeah. So in the change triangle format, there's one of the core emotions there that's called sexual excitement, and so
Mhm.
shifting into an emotional state where where that can kind of replace is oftentimes a more comfortable stance for people,
Yeah,
and so having that kind of and I'm just kind of bringing that to correlation as well. Now in emotional intelligence training, one of the things that I experience as well is that like people have sort of a psychological sort of foundation of what their level of empathy is, and one of the things that can balance this out is that if you don't have natural empathy, like if your natural empathy is low where you don't actually feel what the other person is feeling, that there's communication tools, there's actual skills that you
yeah,
can supplant on top so that at the very least you're still getting the information from an empathetic stance even though you're not naturally inclined to get it just from the
yeah.
way you are, right? It's like, for example,
Well,
someone
what?
walks into a room and they can't feel the vibe. They're like, I don't know, like is this good a good vibe in here or is this a bad vibe in here? Meanwhile, someone else can walk in the room and go, oh man, the vibes in here are awesome, or no, the vibes in here are super tense. Like they can sense that something has gone on. The same thing is true with empathy. That someone is just like what, and someone else is like, oh, okay, I'm totally getting it. And that if you have that ability to build hard skills on top of say a lower empathetic state, or vice versa, create some
Yeah,
ability to create boundaries around maybe getting overwhelmed by someone else's.
for
Um,
sure. It's hard to have empathy when someone's telling you all your faults, right? Like when your partner is saying, I came home, I looked in the bank, where did the money go? Or I came home, there was a mess, or the dishes weren't done, or you didn't do this. It's hard to have empathy. So the essentially you're trying to get to, being able to stand in the storm with her.
Mm.
And I used that, that technique I shared, that I just shared, of sort of focusing on, um, that sexual excitement. That's what helped me in the beginning. I don't use that anymore, but when I started using it, I needed that to penetrate through the storm that was coming at me, to
Mm.
stay present. That's just what worked for me. Um, Now I know, I've developed the ability to stand in the storm and be present. It's still a discipline and practice. It's still hard, but I don't need to use that technique. But that's what helped me break through.
And I think that that ability of knowing like that these things are still difficult. They're still going to challenge you, regardless of what your skill set is, right? I
Yeah,
mean, it's to use a sports metaphor. When you get better at a sport, you don't stay at the amateur whatever level it is. You find a more challenging group to play with. So if you get really good at tennis and you play against a novice, it's you find a more challenging opponent, or a partner to play with, and so that even as you're growing together, that the challenging moments still happen. They just take on a different sort of scale and scope around what's going on. Because
for
when you
sure.
started
This
dating,
is some of the hardest stuff we're talking about.
yeah. Yeah, like
Yeah.
it's intense, right? Because when you start dating, it's like it's pretty simple. You're like, okay, cool. What movie you want to see? Oh, this movie came out. Let's go do that. And then you go your separate ways, back to your own place or whatever happens to be. And then later on, as you get more and more integrated with the other person, things become more rooted. Like what you said, you've got like maybe a house and shared assets and children and combination of social groups really starts to come together. And then what does that mean? And you or your wife or your partner ends up with a falling out with one individual in that relationship, and then how does that come sort of cascade into what's going on with you? And
Yeah, that's
like
a whole
these,
other pattern, is
yeah, exactly.
priorities. Priorities is a whole other set of patterns. You know,
Yeah, so
this
talk
is
about
all
that.
leadership. This is
Yeah,
all leadership,
yeah,
by the
yeah,
way. This is
100%.
about how do we show up and lead ourselves and our relationships.
Yeah.
Um,
Now,
and
what you said earlier about criticism. So
yeah,
criticism is, the Goldman Institute is considered one of the four horsemen of one of the four apocalyptic
of the
horsemen of the
Gottman, yeah.
relationships. Yeah, or the Gottman Institute. Sorry, Daniel Goldman for emotional intelligence. Yeah, the Gottman Institute, and it's so important to know when that's happening. And I find this even with if I'm coaching leaders within teams or people within teams that um, sometimes I'm like, well, there seems to be quite a level of criticism going on. Well, there seems to be a lot of contempt. And you're not even talking to them anymore. So the stonewalling's happening. It's like, man, you got 3 out of 4. That's a major issue.
Yeah.
And so, the more of these that sort of come forward, and to be aware, I think is a really important thing in a relationship. Like to be aware of, am I being critical, like to the person, like character attack? Is that actually happening? So rather than being like, hey, you know what, like when I come home and the dishes aren't done, I kind of feel like it just doesn't allow me to relax. That's a positive way to share that you're not fond of the dishes not being done when you get home. But coming home and saying like you're so lazy, you never do the dishes, that's a character attack. That's a
For
criticism. You're
sure.
leading down the wrong path,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then if there's contempt on top of it, where you're like you don't even see the value in the other person, now you've got this whole other layer of problem. And when those two come in, the other two become really really easy, right? Like the whole like stonewalling and it just becomes this major issue.
Yeah.
And so to be aware in the relationship, to be aware that hey, you're there, we're present, and we care about what's going on, is super vital. Um, so then, okay, so now you've got people. So coming back to the relationship quest, so you've got couples. You're working with couples. You're bringing all these things to the fore, which is amazing. Like it's so great that this is what you and Christina are working on. And um, like how do you measure that there's these positive impacts going on, like how do you get a sense of sort of fulfillment around it? I mean, obviously you're knowing that these things are kind of happening, but what are some of the things that you guys are sort of touching base on, or words or shifts that you're seeing that you're like, okay, this is really becoming salient and is shifting these people's lives? Like what maybe
Yeah.
one or two. It doesn't have to go into.
So we have what we call the eight S's of lasting love, the
Oh, okay,
eight
cool.
essentials of lasting love. And that gives people these eight categories to measure how are we doing in these areas. And that's a very powerful way, where you're able to actually measure. These are the main essentials to lasting love or not, right? And so going through those with the people we work with is sort of where we start, and then it gives you something specific, these specific areas to work on.
Mm,
Usually one or two are going to stand out. Okay, we need some attention there.
gotcha.
For example, one of the S's is speech, and that's about communication. So usually 3/4 of the people are coming into the relationship work, and one of the things they're saying is, we don't communicate well. We need better communication. And one thing I asked we do these 3-day VIP virtual couples retreats. Um, and one of the things when this came up in our last one, I asked, well, why do you want good communication? You don't want good communication for the sake of communication. Why do you want it? And people ultimately, they want to be able to connect, and they don't want to have so many struggles that they know are unnecessarily necessary and could be avoided. So, what you're talking about there and coming home with the dishes not being done, how do you communicate that in a way that creates connection and moves things forward versus just pushes the other person away?
Yeah,
Yeah, and that's communication. So, these 7 essentials or 8 essentials is sort of how we do that.
that's amazing. So okay, so um, how about okay? So we're kind of coming close to the end here, so we'll start to kind of like
Can
tie
I
the.
share one
Oh,
or more of
100%.
the S's?
Yeah.
So
So
there's one
for
that's been
sure.
showing up quite a bit, and people are finding it very helpful and powerful. It's shared path, that you
Mm,
have a shared path. And this is about having time together, having quality time together. It's also about, having a vision of what you want to create together. And it doesn't mean that you need to be doing everything in your life together, but people who have been together for some time, it can be very easy to drift apart and end up on completely different paths. Um, some of the most powerful shared paths that I've seen is when people share a faith, a certain faith. And if one person has a strong faith and the other doesn't, that can be really difficult for a relationship. Doesn't mean it's a deal breaker unless
mhm.
it is for the people in the relationship. But it's important that we share a path. Maybe that's how we raise our kids. Maybe that's a business. Like for Christina and I, we have this mission of supporting people in their relationships. um, in my last relationship, near the end, my parents would call and they say, well, where, what's the other person doing? And half the time we wouldn't know where each other was. We were just ended up in totally different paths. And not only that, but the paths became incompatible as well. So um, another example is if someone goes to, because I coached for Tony Robbins for so many years, we'd have these people come in where one person had gone to this live event and grown exponentially, and the other person that stayed at home. For those sorts of things, it's really important if you're going to go to a retreat to do it together.
Yeah,
Doesn't mean you never can have a solo journey, just means you want to have a path that you share together. So that's another one of the essentials of lasting love that we've been helping people with.
that's amazing, and it's so, and you can see it like when you say that, and you start to think about like, or at least for me, when I start to think about like relationships that, whether they're friendships or family relationships that have sort of followed the course, and
Yeah.
versus ones that have drifted into different areas. The values have shifted, the goals have shifted, the self identity of how I see myself relative to that other person has shifted, and then those relationships inevitably kind of collapse.
Yeah.
sometimes in a natural sort of organic way, and other times in an explosive manner, and
Yeah.
that's just the way life goes, right? And but the
Yeah.
ones that maintain themselves are the ones where there is that shared value, and that, and even if it's, and this is another really interesting thing, because Simone and I have always had this thing where we always believed that we were not two hearts, two halves of a heart. We're always two hearts that are sharing, and that we would never split 50% of who we were as individuals, because when we're able to share what we're passionate about with the other person, and the other person loves us because of those passions, that it becomes just this really amazing thing, because I'm so interested in what she has going on, and she's so interested in what I have going on, and then that and then that's so much of where that love comes from.
Yeah.
And so even if we have these other paths, that the care and the compassion and the interest and the like, the wonder, right, like that wonder of being like,
Yeah.
oh, that's really
For
amazing, that
sure.
that means so much to you, is such a phenomenally positive frame of mind.
Totally.
um, so Brodie, how do people get a hold of you?
Can I just make one more comment
Yeah, go
on
ahead.
what you just shared? So what I hear you talking about is safety,
Yeah.
one of the S's. And this is, we're safe to be ourselves. That takes time in a relationship, and it requires trust. And yeah, so we've been talking about sort of the masculine and patterns that work. Um, we also want to be able to tap into our playfulness and our wonder, and even be able to go through difficult emotional times and be supported. So um, you know, what's I gonna say? Just this idea that 0 to 10, how much can you be yourself in your relationship right now? Oh, that's what I was gonna say. These masculine qualities that as men tend to work and produce a better result. It's not about putting on a mask
Mm-hmm.
and trying to, putting on this masculine mask. It's about your growth and becoming the best version of yourself that you can be. These are powerful leadership and qualities that we can develop as a man that just end up creating a much better result and more fulfillment and lasting love and growth in a relationship. So I wanted to share that. It's not about putting on a mask.
Yeah.
If these don't fit for you, you want to find what fits for you, so you're still growing, and that relationship is, in a sense, inspiring you and motivating you to do the growth work and become an even better person and grow together.
Sorry, excuse me.
Yeah.
um, and I just love the way that you deliver that message. It's so,
Cool.
like, you take these, like, super, like, you know nebulous kind of things that people are struggling with, and you're able to just sort of hone them down. And I think that's a sign of someone who's really, like, honed their craft and
Thank
understands
you.
perspective, and solid coaching. I know every time that you and I have a conversation, this is the first one we're kind of recording for the world at
Yeah,
large to share. They're just, like, so powerful, and we can go on and on and on for hours. We didn't even get to flow state, but I
I
think I
know.
think that that'll come down the road with with another thing. And yeah, just a really really enjoyable approach. I think it's amazing what you've got going on. So you've got your personal coaching, you've got your relationship coaching with Christina. What's the best way for people to get to know what's going on with either one of those two things?
Yeah. So very simple. If you're on Facebook, we have a private Facebook group. We'd love you to join. It's called The Relationship Quest. So at The Relationship Quest is our handle. And then we run these VIP virtual retreats. We have some resources available online, like the 8 S's of essential love, of lasting love. Just therelationshipquest.com. Check us
Cool.
out. Yeah,
And
we're
I'll
here
link
to
those in the
serve.
video, in the description in the video as
Perfect.
well. And awesome, Brodie. It's always a pleasure.
Great
Um,
conversation. I love what
yeah,
you're doing, Edwyn. It's really a powerful thing you're doing, and people are getting great stuff here. So
that's
thanks for
great.
your service.
Oh, you're welcome, brother. Okay, awesome. So Brodie, I mean, I'll hopefully run into each other soon. But thanks everyone for tuning in, and yeah, get a hold of Brodie for the relationship quest. And thanks for being my first guest on the leadership mindset.
Heck yeah, I loved
Boom,
it.
you put the
Awesome.
flag in. I love it.
Look forward to coming back for more.
All right, take care, everybody.